So we've been assessing John Ramsey's conversation with Megyn Kelly to look at some of the discrepancies, basically of then and now. Honestly, I didn't think there would be so many discrepancies, and I didn't think there would be so many blatant hangups, quite honestly, that would come from this interview. I thought John Ramsey was going to be his normal self in sort of purporting the same, theories that have been out there. Just I thought it was going to be just like on a loop. This, but I know how to answer this question. I know how to answer this question. But it's not really been like that. So we're going to jump back into this analysis. But before I jump back into this analysis, I do want to say thank you to an avid supporter of the channel, one of the avid supporters of the channel. I really appreciate Eve of West once again. Cannot say how much I truly appreciate Eve for kind of giving of herself and supporting the channel. Thank you so much, Eve. Obviously, boom. Got to give a big hug, big shout out to Eve. A huge shout out to Eve. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the next video. And thank you all for liking the comment, liking the donation. So thank you so much. We're going to jump back into the analysis. So here we go.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. Lou told me, after he resigned and we were able to talk to him freely, that he'd looked at the case for several months and all the evidence and said, no, please, you're going the wrong direction. So he said he went to their war room where they were strategizing this assault, frankly, and said, you guys have looked at this case longer than I have, but, I've looked at it, and have you ever thought maybe you're going the wrong direction? And he said it was like pouring a bucket of water on the participants. They wouldn't talk to him after that. They banned him from their war room and just wouldn't listen. And that's what he said. I'm not going to be part of persecuting an innocent person, and resigned and continued to work on the case for the rest of his life, which I was very grateful for. And
yeah, well, you weren't invited. Number one. Number two, you were working with the DA. You quit the DA. So I don't know what you're coming in here for. You can get out. Just because I tell you to get out doesn't mean you're right. It just doesn't mean I don't want to hear that, because that's not pointing me in the right direction. Because we've already addressed your concerns. That ain't it. And it ain't just us. It's the FBI. Mr. Hotshot.
he was an amazing fellow.
Well, I think it was a 60 Minutes Australia piece I watched. They had old tapes of him, and he went to the crime scene, to your old house, and he went to that window that was broken in your basement, because one of the theories was nobody got in through that window. That was a window you had broken not long before, because you had locked yourself out of the house and you were trying to get in.
That's true.
So people were saying, no, somebody said only a midget could get through, a little person could get through that window. That wasn't it. This is back on. It had to be one of the mother or the father. And right. He goes right through it. The video shows him going right through it. Was that something, by the way, I meant to ask you, did you go through it when you had locked yourself out? Yeah. Had you gone through that window to get in?
Yes. I had.
Yeah, so of course you could.
Locked myself out one day, and nobody was home. And so that was the way I got into the house, so I could unlock the door. I didn't have a key. The person that said, no, it's impossible for someone to get through that window was the detective investigating the case. It was purely misleading, purely false information, but it biased everybody, the public, the media, towards us once more. That was the whole strategy. And so that was confirmed by the district attorney to us, that was her whole strategy. And she also said their only evidence that they would present, and it's really not evidence, that led them to think that we were guilty was we did not act right that morning. And that's
the allegation was that Patsy was distraught, but that you didn't cry, And one of the cops on the scene said, I never saw them console each other. And in my presence, I never saw them hold one another.
Yeah. Well, look, they've watched too much crime scene movie or TV, I think. When I lost my first daughter, Beth, I got a phone call from my brother, and he said, John, Beth.
The cops have the cops have watched too much crime scene movies. Well, they're cops, so what would you expect them to be doing? At that time, I questioned if Patsy Ramsey was a possible suspect. I asked myself, why would a stranger take the time to stay in the Ramsey's house and write a ransom note? At that time, the focus of the investigation changed to include a possible family member as well as someone from outside the family.
Is gone. She's killed. And there's nothing I could do. I couldn't get her to the best doctors. I couldn't rush to her side. It was over. That morning with JonBenet, it wasn't over yet. I could get her back if I kept my wits about me and focused on getting her back.
What?
To whatever I could possibly do. I was focused on getting her back, and I felt I could get her back. I'd arranged for the ransom money to be available almost immediately. One of the, again, this Linda Art, I think, wrote in her report that John was observed casually going through the mail that morning.
Yep.
There was a mail drop where the mail came through the house or through the front door. And I was going through it. I was looking for another possible communication from the kidnapper. The police should have been doing that. I was not casually going through the mail, but that was her interpretation of that. Again, biased perspective by someone who.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the police can't come in and just go through your mail. They would have to have a search warrant to just go through your mail, sir. They would have to go out and get a search warrant, which they did. For any other, other than the immediate stuff like the ransom note, they had to go back and get search warrants for that stuff. They had to ask you and Patsy for handwriting samples. They can't just go through your mail, John.
Who's never been in that situation to evaluate whether somebody's acting right or not. So that was my focus. You know, Patsy was rough. She was in bad shape. She had a bowl in front of her in case she threw up. But I was focused 100% on whatever I could do to get JonBenet back. That was my job.
Can we talk about two things? We've touched on the Mary Lacy exoneration of 2008 based on DNA. DNA came along. Thank God they did get some DNA and preserve it back in 96. DNA's come leaps and bounds since then, and it had to some extent by 2008. So she said, we've tested it and we've identified the perpetrator as one, possibly two unidentified males. So no hit in the database, but they could tell it was a male and they could tell it was one, possibly two. And that's when she said it's not the Ramseys. Right. Can I just say for the record, did that include Burke?
Yeah, it did. And Burke was exonerated early on. He had to be interviewed by the child psychologists that were associated with the police department. They said, absolutely no way. Burke was not involved in this. He was a 9-year-old, 60-pound child. And
because CBS would do a piece really pointing the finger at Burke in 2016, and he sued over it, and they settled. I don't know what they settled for, but in later years, armchair detective wannabes have decided maybe it was him, maybe it was the 9-year-old, but the Mary Lacy conclusion was it was not Burke.
Right, and that was a conclusion that even the police came to very early on. They ruled out that possibility. Yeah. In fact, they offered to support us in this suit against CBS if we needed their help.
Wow.
To discount that ridiculous accusation.
So he went on Dr. Phil not long after that, and then it just stirred up more. You know, people were like, he wasn't acting right. I'm going to play a soundbite. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I really don't know. I don't know how people sort of fly into the case. You've been living it in the worst way for 26 years. So put this in perspective for us. This is Burke on Dr. Phil in 2016.
A police officer comes in your room, which I assume is the first time in your entire life that a police officer has come in your room with a flashlight, looking around, and you still just stay in bed.
To be fair, I didn't know it was a police officer. It's just kind of...
But somebody comes in your room with a flashlight, and you never get up and say, what is going on here?
I guess I kind of like to avoid conflict, or I don't know. I guess I just felt safer there.
Were you curious?
I'm not the worry type. I'm not the... I guess part of me doesn't want to know what's going on.
Critics would say you weren't curious because you already knew. You didn't have to get up and go check because you knew exactly what had happened.
I was scared, I think. I mean, I didn't know if there was some bad guy downstairs my dad was chasing off with a gun, or, you know, I had no idea.
Let's clear this up once and for all. Did you do anything to harm your sister, JonBenet?
No.
Did you murder your sister, JonBenet?
No.
And just for the listening audience, Burke's answers are all said through what looks like a smile, which is one of the things his critics would react to. Go ahead, John, your thoughts on it.
Well, Burke smiles all the time. When he talks, he just naturally smiles. And those are just laughable criticisms. This was a violent, vicious case, not something that a 9-year-old could even possibly do. So it's really disgusting that people jump to that kind of a conclusion.
Let's move on, because one of the other storylines, as we touched on a minute ago, was the pageants and whether she captured and they do say that some of these pageants can be very attractive in the same way. If you want to, you don't go to like an AARP meeting, they wind up, they volunteer for the Boy Scouts, and they it's sad, but it's true. They go where children are. Yep. So that was, forget the blame, right? I'm not interested in that storyline. But it is possible that this person had seen JonBenet at one of these pageants where she was a darling. I mean, she was winning them. She was absolutely beautiful in every way. So what do you make of that theory? If we're thinking of the possible intruder, maybe they also knew you, but
it's possible. Patsy had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer a couple of years before this happened, and she went through some pretty rough chemotherapy treatments and was declared in remission. And she didn't say it, but I know she was trying to pack a lot of mother-daughter time into what she maybe felt was a limited lifetime. And I didn't really care for these little pageants. I mean, I'm a father, and I had preferred my daughters wear burqas until they were about 30, but that wasn't my choice. And I thought, well, this is just wonderful mother-daughter time for Patsy and JonBenet. They didn't, excuse me, they didn't take it seriously. So we got to win. In fact, Patsy and I joked, it'd be good if she lost a few of these pageants, because she needs to understand you'd always win in life. But JonBenet loved doing it. It was fun. She was an extreme extrovert. And, people accuse Patsy of, dragging JonBenet to these pageants for her own satisfaction. That wasn't true at all. It was just something JonBenet enjoyed doing. And Patsy wanted her to try a lot of different things, which she did. But I always thought the people at these little pageants were just moms and grandmoms. And there was one indication, of course, we learned later that, there was at least one guy there that wasn't there for his daughter, based on some questioning that came out and some comments. But it's possible. And, but I still fall back to, I think, John Douglas's theory and Lou Smith's. It might have targeted who JonBenet is, and she was my daughter, and she was obviously, I'm told, and you know, I never read the autopsy. I just couldn't bring myself to do that. But I of course hear through the news that she was, and that wouldn't have been necessary to hurt me as much as to satisfy this creature's desires.
So this is why, forgive me, and if you don't want to go here, we don't have to, but this is why when I was reading the autopsy report, and we don't have to get into the details, but the one thing they said, it was unclear to me whether that was one of the DNAs that they were able to retrieve. And there was a suggestion that maybe there was some sort of, they hurt her and it didn't involve, a male body part. And that's kind of interesting if you think about this being a person whose goal was just to hurt you. Maybe it was somebody who was just trying to hurt her as opposed to or her. Yeah,
that's possible. And there was found, but not dissimilar to this situation, a case similar break-in that happened a few months later in the same neighborhood.
With Amy, yes. Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay. There are many people who Lou Smit had been taking a hard look at, the honest investigator who quit before he died, unfortunately, in 2010. And he gave the list of suspects to his daughter, which is how we know who he's looking at. And the daughter's a hero. She's running around getting these people's DNA without them knowing it. It's like kind of amazing, this piece of the story. But
I'm so grateful for that group.
Before we get to Lou and his daughter and what happened there, there's this neighbor, and we're calling, and the papers are calling the daughter Amy. Her parents don't want her outed. But Amy, I think, was very young too, 9 or 12, right around there.
I didn't know a whole lot about that case. I knew that it happened, but I think she and JonBenet were in a dance class together. And I think she was a year older than JonBenet, maybe.
Oh, no, actually, my producers are telling me she's 12. So she's a young girl. And she's at home. This is months after JonBenet was killed. Amy is in the same neighborhood. And she had a man wake her up, dressed in black, in the middle of the night, who tried to muzzle her so that she couldn't scream. And by the grace of God, her mother heard something. By the grace of God, truly, her mother heard something and heard muffled voices coming from her 12-year-old daughter's room in a way that sounded very unsafe. The mother grabbed pepper spray and went into the room. I mean, it's an extraordinary story. Yeah. And the guy jumped out the second floor window and ran. I mean, it's a miracle, thank God, that unfortunately the daughter, she was not killed. And they went to the Boulder cops and said, we think this might have had something to do with JonBenet. Like, it's too close in time. And, here's our evidence. And the dad is on record as saying, the Boulder cops could not have cared less. Were not interested in pursuing any link between the two cases. And they really felt like it was because they were just focused on you two.
Right. That's what I've learned. When I first heard about this, I thought, well, that's a very similar MO for the criminal as it was in our case. He was in the house when they came home that night. They went to bed, and then at 3 a.m, he entered the little girl's room. And I thought, well, that's so similar to what I think happened in our case. And Chief Beckner, who was the police chief.
Yeah, except this guy forgot to bring his taser to completely incapacitate this girl. He forgot that. Both of them actually forgot to bring the right tools. They didn't come with a taser. They didn't come with a garrote. They didn't wake her up and take her to the kitchen and feed her pineapples and a glass of tea. They didn't take her out of one set of clothes and put her in another set of clothes. They didn't prepare or pre-plan a ransom note. Okay.
The chief of police was asked, is there a connection? He said, oh, no, these cases aren't the same because the second little girl wasn't murdered. And it was one more of the unbelievable statements that came out of the police department. Of course, it's similar, and thankfully she wasn't murdered. But I'd heard.
Oh yeah, by the way, and I can't remember if she was actually impacted. I'll use that word, impacted or not. When I read the story, I cannot remember. I thought the mom, correct me in the chat, I thought the mom had caught the guy before he did anything. That's what I thought. Number one. Number two, if he moved forward with it and was actually able to make an impact, then that's consistent with what he came in there to do. What we don't know about JonBenet is that we don't see from the autopsy report any male action from that perspective. From what I understand, we don't see any male action. So that's different. That would be different. So I'm saying, man, you gotta.
That the father was quoted as saying on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of police performance, I'll give him a -5. So he was very unhappy with them as well, but only because they just kind of blew off the case and went on. And I
there's
think
a real danger when the police get tunnel vision. They're real. I mean, every defense attorney who's ever represented a murder defendant argues they had tunnel vision on my guy. My guy didn't do it. They did. They had tunnel vision on him. But in some cases, it really is true, and it can result in the wrong person being arrested and put on trial. Thankfully, not in your case, but you were heading down that lane.
Oh, absolutely. And we weren't worried about this. I mean, it was distressing, but our attorney said, look, the system's broken. The police don't know what they're doing. We cannot promise you won't be charged with murder. We'll promise you one thing with 100% money back guarantee. We will destroy him in court. So don't worry about that. But it's not going to be fun, but do not worry about being convicted. We'll kill him, because we knew what the evidence was and what they were trying to do. We had one experienced district attorney tell us, look, I have never, ever seen police try to explain away unidentified male DNA assault case. Never. That's the key piece of evidence. And yet that's what the Boulder police tried to do. That was a real problem for them, that we had this unidentified male DNA.
Yes. Yeah, that's a massive problem, and it's the reason you've never been charged, and it's the reason Mary Lacey says it wasn't you guys.
Part of your success could have come from you seeing the evidence before you got to trial, because you weren't yet indicted or charged, but you still saw the evidence before any trial, before anything. So some might argue that you were able to tailor your responses. That's what I'm saying. Like, you didn't do some sort of, like, you didn't happen upon this stuff like with some sort of integrity and some sort of honesty. You knew the answers to the test before you took the test. The same way you did the lie detector tests.
On the subject of DNA, I read that the coroner did not examine the body until 7 hours after she was discovered, and that the coroner only spent 10 minutes at the crime scene. That's a crazy amount of time. 7 hours is a long delay. And I wonder, John, whether they Have you ever been told whether they were able to determine the time of death?
I've never been told. No, I don't know.
Do you have
I
any reason to
believe,
believe there's any chance she was alive in the morning, before, like, I hate to go there,
well,
but like when the first cop got there, is there any chance she was alive?
I don't think so. She was to death, is my interpretation of what I've heard, and then struck with an object that created a pretty good crack in her skull, to be totally accurate. So I don't think she could have possibly been alive that morning.
Okay. But that's another area of DNA that absolutely should be examined, because there was a murder weapon. There was like a rope, they call it a garrote, and it was tied to a little piece of wood. And so that one of the questions I know, John, people are asking is, did they ever, one end of the rope had a knot and one had two knots or something like that. But the question was, did they ever untie
Maybe before you jump on a podcast and exonerate John, you should wait long enough to look into the evidence. I'm not saying you should be perfect. I'm just saying, before you say what he did or did not do, or how stupid the Boulder police were, maybe you should just wait long enough.
the knots and test in there for DNA?
To my knowledge, no. They had sent a number of samples like that to Bodie Labs, which is a outside DNA lab, and for some reason chose not to test or not to pay for the tests of 5 or 6 items, one of which was the garrote. And that's one of the things we're asking the governor to make happen is, let's get those items tested. Why weren't they tested? Was it because it was too expensive? They wanted to save money? I don't know.
What do you think is in the box of things that have not been tested?
I don't know. I don't know. One journalist.
Boulder District Attorney's Office investigative memo. Chief Investigator Andy Horita. Victim JonBenet Ramsey meeting with forensic scientists and resubmittal of evidence for DNA testing. Witnesses: Ann Louise Williamson, PhD. Custom casework humanitarian supervisor. Blah, 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 blah. Skip. Case summary notes also notes that the Colorado Bureau of Investigations lab declined to conduct DNA analysis on the garrote due to the high probability of a DNA mixture being present on the garrote as a result of all persons who have handled the item from the point of manufacture to present. It should also be noted that in the course of preparing the case overview presentation for the Bodie forensic scientist, I noticed that the forensic knot expert from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Corporal Van Tassel, appeared to not be wearing protective gloves in photos depicting his analysis and reconstruction of the knots. Also, the paintbrush piece that was used to construct the knot was depicted in photographs of the ungloved knot expert. Additionally, on page 6 of JonBenet's Bennett's summary, he states that the long underwear bottoms worn by the victim had not been examined for DNA. My review of the case indicates that cuttings were taken from the elastic waistband of the long johns by the CBI and tested for the presence of foreign DNA. The serology portion was completed by CBI agent Joe Clayton. As we saw, 1997 DNA testing was completed on 5/27/99, but an interpretable profile was not developed using the DQA 1 p.m. kits. District Attorney's Office, 20th Judicial District, Mary T. Lacey, District Attorney, on November 7th of 2007. Shannon Evanstad, the Bodie Technology Group, Virginia. Purpose of this letter is to address the evidentiary items submitted to the Bodie Technology Group for DNA analysis regarding the investigation to the first-degree murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Blah, 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 blah. John Ramsey may have touched the garrote. Persons standing over the deceased were crying. No one was wearing gloves. The CBI declined to conduct further DNA analysis of the garrote due to a high probability of a DNA mixture being present on the garrote as a result of all persons who have handled the item from the point of manufacture to present. Gotta be kidding me, dude.
That has followed this case almost from the beginning, has that information, and I need to get that from her, but I don't know exactly what it is. She said there's 5 or 6 items that have never been tested. And the police keep referring back to, well, it's just a minute amount of DNA. We don't want to ruin it. Well, that just tells me they haven't tested the other items, or they've lost them or misplaced them. For some reason, they always stay away from these other 5 or 6 items that have never been tested.
I don't know what planet you live on to where when somebody says, I don't have a lot of water left, I had, or maybe I never did, I inherited a bottle of water. If say I lose somebody really special to me and they give me a vial of cologne like this. Say they give me a vial of like a little thing of cologne like this. Now the cologne is all the way up here, but what if it were the case that the cologne was all the way down here, right? And there's barely any left. You cannot, let's say you cannot find this in stores anywhere because it was a limited edition. When I say, if somebody says, hey, you have that, cologne that was very special to this individual, why don't you wear some? I respond and say, I don't want to wear any of that cologne because I am concerned that it will deplete my resources of that cologne because I can't find it in stores anymore. I can't get more of it. And so if I go ahead and take some more, the more I do that, then something happens. I lose the whatever happens, I don't want to deplete my resources because this is all I have left. That doesn't mean that I lost the vial. I still have it. It's still with me. Critical thinking skills and not even critical thinking skills, like listening, active listening. I didn't say I lost it. I just said I don't want to use the last of what's left because you won't let me exhume JonBenet's body. And because you won't allow me to do that, guess what? I cannot get any more DNA from her. So I have to hang on for dear life to the last bit of DNA I have left from her. Do you understand what I'm talking about? What the heck?
Or checked for DNA evidence. And that's what we're asking to be done. And their reluctance to even mention those items makes me think they've either misplaced them or lost them.
Oh, goodness. I know, and you're on a push to have the governor remove this case from the Boulder PD and let these sophisticated DNA labs have access to this as opposed to relying on the same cops and detectives that have blown it thus far. There are really sophisticated DNA labs. Do you have confidence that if they had access to this box, for lack of a better descriptor, they could make whatever progress is possible, they could make it?
And that's really all we're asking the governor to do, is push the case either out of the Boulder hands or require them to take this evidence to be tested by one or two really cutting edge labs in this country and see what we get. If we can get some more good DNA evidence, then you take that evidence and put it in the public database and see what you come up with.
Yes.
This has been done in the last few years with remarkable success. And really what got me, had me in my mind take the gloves off with the police is we had spent some time with the regional FBI folks there in Denver and got a relationship where we said, look, this is what needs to happen. And in fact, they're the ones that said, look, the government does not have the latest DNA technology. We'll get it eventually, but we don't have it. We don't have it at the FBI. They certainly don't have it at the state level. And of course, not even ridiculous to think they have it at the police level.
The FBI doesn't have the latest technology? You have got to be kidding me. You are literally sitting on this panel. The same government that releases 10-year-old technology after they've used it all up and got done with it. Oh, now you can put it in movies and talk about it. Yeah, because y'all don't really use that stuff anymore. And to say that the government doesn't have the cutting edge technology when people go out for government contracts with this kind of stuff all the time, and the government gets the opportunity to get the best pick of the litter? I don't know what you're talking about.
They told us that we got to get this DNA testing done by one or two very cutting edge labs outside, and then use this new approach of genealogy tracing. And there's a hope that would move this case along to conclusion. They went to the Boulder police, said, we're here to help. We'd like to make this happen. We'd help you. You can take all the credit. And the Boulder police blew them off, said, no, we don't need your help. And that was the game's over as far as I'm concerned. We got to start.
When was that? How long ago?
Oh, it's probably 6 months ago.
Just so people know, I had this woman on my show at NBC. CeCe Moore is her name, and I know you must have talked to her. She's the one who was really at the center of this genealogy research. And what they do is they take a piece of DNA, and we already know that the DNA that they found on JonBenet did not produce a hit in the databases that are available, at least as of the last time they told us. Yep. So the perpetrator had not gone into the system yet, but they don't need that. Mm-hmm. All they need is for somebody related to the perpetrator to be in the DNA system. So if I were in the DNA system, let's say I wanted to do 23andMe, let's see what my ancestry is, whatever. Then if my results got uploaded on this other website that CeCe Moore uses, that a lot of people who upload their DNA results use, because you get more information from it. It's not 23andMe, it's something related. Mm-hmm. So let's say they're sitting there. She can access them. She may not, she can see a lot of things on there. And let's say I have a relative who commits a crime. That relative's DNA was not going to pop up. Like maybe they committed a crime, but the crime scene, they didn't see him because he hadn't been arrested yet. But mine will. And this is what CeCe Moore, she's like, all I can tell you is that Megyn Kelly is related to this killer. And so I'm going to build this big family tree around Megyn Kelly. I'm going to figure out who her grandfather, what great-grandfather, look at her husband's side. I'm going to look at, because all this stuff is publicly available. She looks at their wedding announcements and birth announcements. It's crazy great detective work. Yes, and she gets her man. I mean, CeCe Moore is like, they solve a case a week doing this. And so if we could take a fresh look at the JonBenet DNA.
Isn't CeCe Moore an armchair detective? Mm-hmm. because she never went to school for it or got any formal training. She just started doing it and she enjoyed doing it. People came up and said she did her own family tree, and then people came up and said, "Hey, can you do mine?" And then she just ran across a community, and then the community that she was in said, "Hey, do you think that, maybe you can use this for solving cases?" And I said, let me give it a try. She's an armchair detective, right? Shouldn't listen to Cece. Right. But now you're singing the praises of an armchair detective. Meanwhile, you want to try to criticize other armchair detectives. Get out of here.
DNA, from that perspective,
Right.
even if the guy's never gotten into the system from the last time they tested it, somebody might be in the system that could lead us to him.
That's right. The COVID system that the FBI uses, the federal database of criminals or arrested felons, is fairly small. And the states can contribute or not to that database. It takes 9 markers out of 15 to be accepted in the database, but it's of people that have already been found criminal or at least arrested for felonies. And it depends on the state what that rule is, but it's not a very big database. And what the public database of the 23andMe, both Jan and I submitted our $35, get our ancestry to that database. They find a reasonably, close match or something at least is of interest, and they do almost a backwards family tree. And then they find, hey, here's a relative that lived in Boulder in December 1996. And then they start looking at that guy or that person and get his DNA. And these remarkable success solutions to these old cases have been using that technique. And most of these people were not on anybody's radar. They weren't in the COVID or the federal database. And in fact, the Golden State Killer, which was, I think, the first one found this way, was a 40-year-old case,
Yep.
and he was a retired cop. So he wasn't in the criminal database.
Exactly.
But it's a
our
remarkable
relative
technique.
was.
And that's what we're asking the governor to make happen. I don't care how it happens. That's what has to happen. And
now what he's saying, John, is, well, he doesn't say anything as I understand it. But the
No.
Boulder PD, they're like, hey, we have great news. We're now going to refer this case to the cold case unit. And the cold case unit, we believe, is going to do better than the other case unit. Why?
don't know. I don't know. I've never heard of this cold case unit. Why? And they said, we're going to refer to them next year. Well, that could be 12 months from now. But I guess you say, well, it's no big rush. It's been 26 years. What's the hurry? And it's a huge frustration for us. And
Do you believe that's is that just cover? Is that a CYA?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. That was put out before I even released the governor's letter, which I only released because he never responded. I thought I would have at least expected to say, yeah, we'll take a look at it. Or I received your letter. Did nothing.
Still hasn't responded?
No. Nope.
Oh,
And
we're going to follow up with him.
I'm not asking him to, apologize to us for the faulty performance of the Colorado justice system. I don't want that. I just want to do the right thing. This is what can be done. You need to do it.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to follow up with his office and find out what is his response. And we'll stay on it, and we'll annoy him to the point where he's going to have to respond. Because I know a lot of people in media who would be very happy to help me annoy him.
I would love
John,
that. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take intense public pressure to do the right thing. That's all we're asking them to do.
None of them will do.
Oh, really? It's going to take intense public pressure. That is interesting. That is an interesting tactic, John. That is an interesting tactic. A tactic, in fact, that you criticize the Boulder Police Department for using. They try to leak information to try to force it out of us. But then you turn around and you laud the same tactic. Oh, absolutely. We should use this. That's the only way it's going to work. The only way it's going to force it out of them is if we just put public pressure. Oh, okay.
Anything unless forced to by the public. And the people of Colorado and the country are on your side. They're not on the side of some law enforcement group that's trying to protect its own backside.
That's
so
right.
I actually think we can make progress with this.
Yeah,
But first I have to squeeze in a break. All right, stand by, John. A quick break. I'll be right back to you after this.
Conclusions, attention by his
Part series in which he took a very deep dive into possible suspects. In the case, I recommend it to everybody, and in part based off of Lou Smit's work and the work of his daughter. Having listened to all of that and cooperated with that, do you have a chief suspect?
It's easy to say, well, that's the guy based on circumstantial evidence. In fact, that happened fairly early on. A person was brought to our attention by his former girlfriend, and had some pretty compelling data that would lead you to believe, hey, this is the guy. In fact, I said that to our attorneys. I said, whoa, this is the guy. And they said, no, don't do a Boulder police on us. We can't jump to conclusions. It was a reminder that that's exactly what happened, and that we got to be careful too. And so there's been 4 or 5 people like that have come up on the radar, on our radar. But it's never been enough evidence. And, private individuals can only do so much. They need the authority of the government to really dig into stuff.
Yeah.
And so we can only go so far in some of these investigations. And so these people are still, in my mind, suspects of interest, people of interest. But,
they need to be investigated. That's the point.
They need to be investigated.
One of the things Lou Smit suggested was that there was that window broken in the basement. Saw there was a scuff mark below the window. There was a suitcase there, which we talked about briefly, that wasn't normally there. And in it, they found a duvet, a Dr. Seuss book, and fibers of the outfit JonBenet was wearing that night, indicating perhaps the murderer might have tried to kidnap her or remove her from the scene in the suitcase, but it was too big. But that would explain quite a bit about the crime scene if only we had a talented investigator devoted to following up on these leads. The point is, the governor must get involved. The governor must remove this case from the Boulder PD. They must get the fibers and the DNA that is available to a qualified lab and start working with the family instead of against them after all these years.
Yeah.
In the time we have left, how do you do it? Because I know you said
They took the DNA to 2 different labs and exonerated you off the second one. Okay. Now we're acting like both of the labs are incompetent.
forgiven whoever did this to JonBenet. And John, it just seems like a mountain too high. How do you do that?
Well, I've dealt with forgiveness a lot over the few years after JonBenet was killed. And I've looked back at how I felt and progressed with that challenge. Certainly in the first couple of years, there was no forgiveness. In fact, I've told people, if you put this guy in the same room with me and I know he's the killer, he won't come out alive. And I would be able to do that with no remorse. And that's not right, but that's how I felt. And then I got to the point where I said, okay, well, forgiveness belongs to the victim. And I'm really not the victim. JonBenet was a victim. So only she can forgive. And that's, of course, not possible. And that kind of got me off the hook. And then I finally realized forgiveness is really a gift you give yourself. You release that anger and that desire for revenge. Doesn't mean you feel sorry for in our case, the killer. I still want him held to held to accountability to the extreme level of our justice system. But I've released that anger, and it still crops up every now and then, but it's a benefit to myself to release that in the form of forgiveness. Don't want him held.
Staying connected to God helps, yeah. I know. And I'm sure this time of year, even all these years later, is very tough on you. I know you've remarried. I'm so happy to hear that. God bless you, John, and your family. And I think there's a way of finding a Merry Christmas. You know, I hope that you've found that way, and I'll be praying for you this year in particular.
We had a hard time with Christmas for several years. Finally, I realized you got to remember what Christmas is for, and that's reassuring in our case that we know JonBenet is safe and we'll see her again.
Amen to that. Take care. Thank you so much for coming on and telling your story, and we'll stay on it.
So I'm going to shut it down right there. Thanks for going on this journey with me. Saw a lot of nonsense. Raised a lot of people's blood pressure. Yeah, it's pretty telling. So thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks again to Eve for supporting this video. Monetarily. Thank you all of you who liking and sharing and subscribing. Appreciate you so much. Last week was a pretty active week. I think we had 84 shares, so pretty high share rate. So I have to say thank you again to each and every person who shared the video, put it on a playlist, and just kind of got the word out. I appreciate you. You didn't have to do that. You don't have to do that, but you took out of your time to do that. So I appreciate that. And until next time, continue to take care of yourself. Take it easy.